Okay, good morning, everyone. It is so nice to be here this morning. I'm going to go ahead and pray so that we can get right in it. Jesus, I thank you so much for this morning. God, I thank you for the ways that you have served and loved us. God, I thank you for bringing every person here. God, I thank you for your presence, for all the miracles that are represented in this room. Amen. Okay, so Pastor Andy spoke last week about slaying giants, and we had a really cool real-life example of taking our stones of praise, and throwing them out, getting them out, just like he was sharing a little bit ago. And some of you guys, I won't mention any names, were throwing them as if you were throwing them at a real live giant in front of you. It was so powerful. We had rocks flying everywhere. It was dangerous, but also very good. We like to live life on the edge here. If you've never visited the beat before, just buckle up. But today we're going to have another action step for you, and it's not going to be throwing any stones, so don't worry. Everyone's safe today. But today we're going to be talking about stones of remembrance and learning how to build our lives on a firm foundation, a foundation that is rooted in God's faithfulness and his goodness to us. And so we're going to talk about that, unpack that today. First of all, I want to look at the Hebrew word. Kyle coined this phrase called word nerds. So if that happens to be you, if you love where the root words come from, this is the Hebrew definition for gratitude. So we've been talking about extreme gratitude, and so I decided to look at the Hebrew word. I'm not going to pronounce it for you today at all. But what it does mean is it means recognizing the good. Recognizing the good in your life. And if you unpack that a little further, let's think of the good things. And we think about all the way in the beginning, God made creation. He made light, and he made waters, and he made land and animals and humans, and he said it was good. Everything that he made was good, and he holds all things together in him. And so when we want to look at his goodness, if we have no other resources available, we can look to his word. We can look to see what the Bible says. What does he say about his goodness? In Psalm 23, it says, he gives me everything I need. In Psalm 103, he fills my life with good things. In John 15, apart from him, I can do nothing. Philippians 4:19, this is one of my favorites. It says, my God will meet all of my needs according to his riches and his mercies. And in Romans 8, it says, nothing can separate you from God's love. Those are all good things. Those are all miraculous things that happen in our lives that are applicable not just to me, but to you this morning. And as we unpack God's goodness, and as I was looking into this and talking about extreme gratitude, some of you guys know I'm a mom. I have 4 kids, and they're so much fun, and it leaves not a lot of time for deep theological resource digging, okay? So I had to do with what God was giving me. So when talking about extreme gratitude and praying for this, there was a certain little blue fish that could not leave my mind, and her name is Dory. And does anybody know what Dory suffers from? Oh, you forgot. Thank you. I was hoping someone would knock it down. Yes, she suffers from short-term memory loss. Can anybody relate to that at all? Nobody? Okay, yes. Some of you guys don't even know what you had for dinner last night, let alone what happened a year ago or a month ago. It happens to us all. And with this fast-paced culture that we live in, where we have quick 30-second videos, and we have the what's next? What are we doing next? What's after this? That's part of our culture. It's part of what's going on around us, and it's easy to get distracted and to forget about things that are happening in your life or things that had happened, good or bad. And so when we face giants, we often struggle we struggle with what I like to call short-term miracle memory loss. And I know that I can relate to that, where God does something incredible in me, and I forget about it. Maybe a week, a month, 2 years, and then I'm faced with the same giant, and I say, God, what do I do? What's going to happen? And he says, don't forget what he's done. But it's so easy, and that's not to shame you. Dory isn't up here to shame you today, but it's an encouragement that even people long time ago, the Israelites, have struggled with remembering God, remembering who he is. Now, the Israelites, we talked a little bit about them last week, but their biggest error that they made was forgetting God. They forgot the goodness of God. They forgot his love, his miracles. It says in 1 Samuel 12:9, it says, but they forgot the Lord their God. And up to this point, God had done some miraculous things, some things that even us today, we haven't seen things like that before, where God parted the Red Sea and let the whole nation come across and be saved, where he saved them from enemies and giants. He gave them manna in the desert. He provided for them. He saved them, and he brought them into the promised land, flowing with milk and honey, everything that they could ever want. And so Samuel and all the prophets in the Bible kept pleading. They kept pleading to the Israelites and say, you guys can't forget. They continued to remind them, and it says in 1 Samuel 12:24, this isn't the first time this is written. It says, consider what great things the Lord has done for you. Consider it, remember it. And they didn't do that. Immediately after this verse, the Israelites decide that they want to demand a king. They all get together and they say, you know what? We need a king because God's not good enough. We can't really see him, so we need a king. We need someone to represent us in battle that we can physically see and say, that's our king, and he's going to go defeat all the giants for us. And so they kept asking and begging for a king. And then they gave him Saul. Saul was the first king. And if you know anything about Saul, he's a bad guy. He's a really bad guy. And he had some major character flaws. He was selfish. He was prideful. He was arrogant. He was controlling. And you can read all about it in 1 Samuel. I really encourage you to because it's a really interesting story. But he became king, and he succeeded as king, but quickly, very soon after that, he made a major error, and he tried to control and try to be God in a situation. And so it says in 1 Samuel 15:12, it says, Saul has gone up to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor and has turned and gone down to Gilgal. Saul did not recognize God in this situation. He didn't recognize the good. He didn't recognize God at all. He was recognizing himself. Who in the world put him into being a king? Who's the one who delivered them from the enemies? It was all God. But Saul took it upon himself to take all the glory and to take all the praise and to build a monument for himself. And because he failed to recognize God, he was rejected as king. And God goes on to talk about how he regretted making Saul a king. So he decided to go and start working behind the scenes and start working on raising up a new king, a new leader. And I believe that maybe some people in here today need to know and be reminded that God is working behind the scenes in your life. Whether you see it or not, God is working. He is faithful. Just like he was so faithful to the Israelites to work behind the scenes to get them a better king, even though they didn't deserve it, he was so faithful to them. And if we look at David, there's a huge contrast between David and Saul, and the Bible is filled with very interesting stories. But what I found very fascinating between the two kings is that David recognized God in every single victory. Whether it was big or whether it was small, David always recognized God. He's the one who, before he even became king, when he killed Goliath, he gave God the victory and the honor. When he killed 10,000s for the Israelites, he gave God the praise. When he killed lions and bears, he gave God all the victory. And another thing that he did is he wrote Psalms. A majority of the Psalms were written as a legacy of gratitude. As a reminder for himself, but also for us. We can benefit from that today. We can read the Psalms today and see God's goodness. And what's very highlighted and very prominent is that David was not a perfect person. In any way, shape, or form, he was not perfect. And he still was able to remember God's miracles. He was able to say, I'm imperfect, but I can still see the good. I can still see the good things that God has done in my life. Even though I've made a mess of things, look what God has done. Look how God uses me. And it's amazing. Now, if we look at David's life and we look at his lifestyle, he has a continual lifestyle of just overflowing thankfulness, of gratitude towards God. And we need to see, how does he do this? What was his motivation? Why is he doing this? And in order to do that, we got to go about 1,000 years before that. God was doing some miraculous things in the Israelites, and he had parted the Red Sea and had them come across, and then they forgot about that. They forgot God did that miracle. And then again, God parts the Sea of the Jordan for them to get across again with the ark of the Lord. And immediately after that story, we land here in Joshua 4 because they have this commandment. It says, when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, now the whole nation was 2.5 to 3 million people. Men, women, children. That's a lot of people that God saved and preserved and showed up and showed a real life miracle in front of their eyes. It said, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you stay tonight. Then in verse 6 and 7, it says, the stones serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. God knew a long time ago, he knew how forgetful people would be. He knew that we would suffer from short-term miracle memory loss, and he provided a way. He knew the importance of remembering. He knew that it was so important, not just for our faith, but for the people after us to know what God has done, to know the miracles that you witnessed with your own eyes. He knew it was important to remember those. But laying the stones and building them, they're not just for your own personal faith, but they build other people's faith too. It's a legacy. And they didn't have paper and pen back then, so they used stones as a memorial for that. And if we look back at that, we can see that we are called to lay